It's alive! Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein on Netflix. It's there. It's alive!
Hi everyone, I'm Rose, and I'm super happy because I finally got to cover the new Frankenstein movie. Is anyone better suited to make a Frankenstein movie than Guillermo del Toro? To do this properly, I thought I'd read the book again and compare. I hadn't read Frankenstein since high school, and all I remembered was that it was awesome. What better excuse to read Frankenstein than for a new Guillermo del Toro movie? So join me as I tell you the secret behind instilling life into a creature, as I go into the book versus movie for Frankenstein. I'll sketch out both the book and the movie, and then talk a bit about the themes in the book. Frankenstein was famously conceived on a rainy night in a villa by Lake Geneva in 1816. Mary and her husband Percy Bryce Shelley were staying with Lord Byron, and in an attempt to stave off boredom, Lord Byron suggested a ghost story writing contest. Where everyone else lost interest almost immediately, Mary came up with a story about a scientist imbuing life on a corpse. Originally a short story, her husband convinced her to expand it into a book. Published anonymously in 1818, the book was immediately popular and made into a play by 1823. It's astonishing to know that Mary Shelley composed Frankenstein at the tender age of 19. What were you doing when you were 19? I certainly wasn't composing literature. For a reprinting of the book in 1831, Mary Shelley revised the text and published it under her own name. This is the text that became the canonical version of Frankenstein that we've all read. The 1818 edition is still printed and is an interesting read if you're a lit nerd. I came across a copy when I was working in a bookstore years ago and was filled with curiosity. Was this the long-lost story of Frankenstein? Not really. The text is more like an earlier edit. The later version is better written and more atmospheric, but the story is exactly the same. 90% of the text is the same, and to find the differences, you have to sit them side by side. Frankenstein is one of modern society's foundation myths, but it somehow feels both ancient and modern. The creature is both a golem and a child of the scientific revolution. On to the story. Frankenstein begins with a brave young adventurer named Walton planning a voyage of discovery to find the North Pole. He writes home to his sister as he provisions a ship for his voyage. Walton seeks the glory of discovery. We're reading what Walton records in his letters and later in his journal. Later, his ship is surrounded by ice deep in the Arctic Circle when his crew sees a huge man on a dog sled fly past on the ice in the distance. Later, they save a man trapped on a piece of ice floating by their ship. He's also in a dog sled, but most of his dogs have died, and the man is nearly frozen to death. They pull him into the ship and attempt to revive him. His name is Victor Frankenstein, and as he recovers, Walton is thrilled to find that Victor is a fellow European and one of great intelligence. Walton tells Frankenstein about his quest for the North Pole, and Victor says, "Unhappy man, do you share my madness? Have you drunk also of the intoxicating draught? Let me reveal my tale, and you will dash the cup from your lips." Here, Victor Frankenstein tells Walton his story. Victor was born to a wealthy family in Switzerland. His father had married late and had children. In addition to Victor and his brothers, they had taken in the young Elizabeth, daughter of an old friend who had passed away. Elizabeth is a beautiful girl, full of charm and happiness, and it is understood that one day she will be Victor's wife. Victor also becomes best friends with Henry Clerval, a happy, intelligent young man from his school. One rainy day, Victor discovers a book by Cornelius Agrippa. Absorbed at once by the ancient science of alchemy, he acquires books by Magnus and Paracelsus and begins a vigorous study of the subject, wanting to continue their search for an elixir of life. One rainy day, Victor sees a huge thunderstorm, and a scientist at their inn explains the principles of electricity. Victor is thrilled and immediately abandons alchemy for science and begins studying math and the natural sciences. At 17, Victor goes off to college in Germany, where he discovers that he has a genius for the sciences. He attaches himself to a chemistry professor who doesn't mock him for studying alchemy, and resolves to learn everything he can about modern science so that he can marry it to the ancient art of alchemy, and by doing so find the true secrets of life. Having quickly mastered chemistry, Victor takes up the study of death, studying the transition between life and death. Doing this, Victor suddenly finds the secret, the mystery that separates them. He realizes that he can, on his own, bestow life on dead matter. Victor abandons his other studies and sets up labs in a small room. He gathers parts of dead people and builds a new body into which he will give life. He spends months preparing, until on a rainy night in November, he completes his task. He sees the eyes of the creature open, and its muscles flex. Struck suddenly by the horror of his new creation, Victor runs out of the room. He paces in his bedroom until, overcome by exhaustion, he falls asleep. At dawn, he is woken by the creature, who has come into the room and opens the curtain of his bed. The creature tries to smile at Victor, and Victor recoils in horror and disgust and runs out into the courtyard of his building and then out into the town. By chance, he runs into his good friend Clerval, who has come to town to go to college with Victor. Clerval observes that Victor looks terrible. They go back to Victor's rooms, where Victor is relieved to find the monster gone. There, he collapses in a fever and is sick for many months. Clerval nurses him back to health, and Victor regains himself by the following spring. Victor joins Clerval in the study of languages and literature, giving up his work in the sciences. Victor is called to go back to Geneva on the news of the death of his younger brother William. The poor boy has been strangled, and their family is grieving. Near the gates of Geneva, Victor goes for a walk and sees the form of the monster in the distance by the mountains. Filled with horror, Victor is suddenly certain that the monster killed William. The creature then runs into the mountains. A friend of Frankenstein's has been charged with the crime, having been found with a trinket the boy had been carrying when he died. Justine maintains her innocence, and Victor is secretly sure that the monster did the thing, but he can't get himself to tell anyone about it. Justine is executed, having been forced to confess. Victor is troubled by his guilt over the death of William and Justine, and he goes for a long hike in the Alps to clear his head. There, on a lonely glacier, the creature finds him and demands that Victor hears his tale. The creature takes Victor to a mountain hut, where he relates what happened to him after Victor disappeared. The creature, newly formed and confounded by all his senses waking at once, had made his way to the forest at the edge of town, where he spends several days simply learning to differentiate the objects he sees and the sounds he hears. He eats nuts and berries and drinks water from streams. He's wearing clothes he had taken from Victor's rooms and a cloak he finds on a tree. The creature finds a fire, and it delights him, and he learns to feed it pieces of wood. Days pass, and winter comes, and the creature must leave to find food. He wanders, aimless, until finding a hovel dug next to a small cottage. Here he is warm, and watches the family in the cottage through a chink in the wood. There lives an old blind man and his 2 children, a handsome young man and a lively young girl. The monster listens to them and learns the basics of language. He tries to help them invisibly by bringing firewood in the night. To the cottage comes a beautiful Arabian woman. At her arrival, the young man is ecstatic, and the embrace is too long separated. She had been the intended of the young man, and they had been kept apart by her father, but she had found them again so they could finally be together. She doesn't speak their language, so they teach her to speak French, and the monster learns along with her. He learns to speak and then to read. In the forest, he finds a set of books, including Paradise Lost and Plutarch and Goethe. The monster learns from these books what constitutes virtue and vice in the lands of men. The creature decides he wants to talk to the cottagers and begins by introducing himself to the blind old man while the others are away. The old man is friendly, but the others come back early, and the son attacks the creature, who he thinks is attacking his father. The creature runs away, going into the forest in shame and anger. He sleeps and calms down and goes back to the cottage, but the family is left there for good, terrified of the monster. In rage and pain, the creature burns down the cottage and goes into the woods. Not knowing where else to go, he resolves to find his creator, whose papers he had found in the pockets of his clothes. The creature makes his way to Switzerland, traveling by night to avoid humans. One fine spring day, he goes out in daytime and chances to see a little girl who slips on a bank of a river and falls in. He pulls her out, but when he pulls her up to the bank, he's shot by the girl's father, who thinks he's attacked the girl. The creature runs away in pain from the bullet wound in his shoulder. It heals slowly, and the creature resolves to revenge itself on humanity. He makes his way to Geneva. There, while he's resting one day, a young boy runs past. The creature decides to try to befriend the boy and grabs him. The boy screams, calling him ugly and an ogre, and says that his father will take him. Learning that the boy's father is Monsieur Frankenstein, and that this boy is Victor's brother, the monster decides all at once that his revenge will begin here. He strangles the boy and exults at his revenge. Taking the locket the child wore, the creature plants it on a sleeping woman he finds in a barn, and then escapes. Finished now with the telling of his story up to this point, The monster makes his demand of Victor Frankenstein. He tells Victor that he must make him a female, a mate of his own kind, one which won't run from him in fear. Frankenstein refuses, saying he won't let another fiend run loose in the world. The creature tells him, however, that if he does not do this, if he will not create a mate, then the monster will destroy Victor. He still attempts to reason, saying that he and his mate would go live in the wilds, where no humans could live. Victor insists that the creatures would search out human companionship, and if they met with fear, would again kill and destroy, now as a pair. The monster rejects this case. Stopping to think, Victor suddenly agrees, telling the monster that he will make his mate if the two promise to leave mankind alone. The monster swears this, and then he tells Victor that he will watch his progress, and he goes out into the mountains. Heavy-hearted, Victor goes home and then leaves immediately for England. There he goes far north, to a distant rocky island almost devoid of life. It's there that he sets up a laboratory for the creation of a female. He begins his work again and assembles the body. Victor is well along in his progress when he stops one night to consider. Well, the creature agreed to the terms, the female that he's making hasn't. She could be far more evil and hellish than the first creature. She might not like the creature at all and go off alone to sow chaos. Or worse, they might have children and create a race of demons. Suddenly aware that he might be dooming the entire human race, Victor destroys the body he had been assembling. Rising from his hiding place, the monster comes to ask Victor why he has done this, and Victor screams at him that he will not people the world with a race of demons. The creature rages and declares that he will tear happiness from Victor until there is nothing left. The monster leaves, vowing that he will be there on Victor's wedding night. Victor goes out in a boat to discard the body parts for the female. At sea, a storm rolls in and blows his little boat off course. When he washes ashore, he is in a small village where he is immediately arrested for murder. There, at dawn, they had found the dead body of Henry Clerval. At the sight of the body, Victor falls down into a faint and is very ill. He is ill for months and is kept in a jail cell. His father comes from Geneva to treat him, and takes Victor home when it is proven that Victor was not the murderer. Back in Geneva, Victor's father thinks it's time Victor and Elizabeth should finally wed, thus putting their many tragedies in the past. Victor thinks that his wedding night will finally allow him a chance to confront the creature. He agrees to the wedding, though he suspects it may end with his death. Victor and Elizabeth marry and take a boat to a pretty town on the lake. Elizabeth goes to bed, but Victor stays awake, pacing in the hotel, holding a revolver. Suddenly he hears a scream from Elizabeth's room and he realizes his mistake. Running up to her room, he finds her dead, strangled, and the monster grinning in the window to the room. Victor collapses in a faint. When he wakes, he tells them that the murderer has run. They search but find nothing, and think Victor made it up. Victor goes back home, imagining the monster had gone after his father or his remaining brother. His father is alive, but shocked with the sudden death of Elizabeth, he dies of grief just a few days later. Victor again faints, and wakes up later locked up in a cell in an asylum. Coming back to himself, he attempts to tell his story to a judge, but the judge doesn't really believe him. Even if it's true, he says they have no power to catch a monster like that. Finding no help or solace, Victor decides to take revenge on his own. He devotes his life to finding and killing the monster. At this goal, he throws himself entirely, and resolves to find the monster no matter where it goes. He tracks the monster across the plains of Russia and north into the Arctic. The monster leaves traces for him to follow when it seems he might be lost. Victor feels that the voices of the dead compel him on his mission. Finally, he takes a dog sled out onto the ocean ice, following the monster's sled. And there, almost dead, is where the ship had found him. Finishing his tale, Victor entreats Walton to finish his quest and try to kill the beast if Victor should die. Walton's ship is icebound, and his crew worries that they'll die if they try to continue on to the North Pole. On the point of mutiny, Victor himself entreats the crew to recall that they wanted to go on a glorious mission, and that there is no glory without risk. But Walton decides that his ship will turn back if the ice clears. Victor wants to go on, but can't move and is dying. With his last words, Victor reaffirms all his past decisions. That night, Walton is amazed to find the monster huddling over Victor's body. The monster laments, but Walton calls him a hypocrite for doing so. The monster admits his sins, but says that he was also greatly sinned against by mankind, tortured and tormented at every opportunity. "It is over," he says. He tells Walton there is nothing left but to build his funeral pyre and go on to it, thus ending his own hideous life. He then leaps out the window onto a piece of ice and is carried away by the sea. So ends the strange tale of Frankenstein and his monster. This book is beautifully written. The writing is fabulous. It feels sculpted, like every word has lovingly been molded into place. The problem with the plot synopsis is that it really can't do justice to the book. It's one of those rare lit books that's actually fun to read. I read it for an English class originally and was surprised they'd let us have anything so fun. If you want to read something good, go read Frankenstein. It doesn't matter what genre you like. You like sci-fi? It's one of the first. Horror? Pure gothic terror with a creature who murders tons of people. You want an adventure? The two run across glaciers in the Alps and the snowy tundra of the Arctic. Like classic literature? It's that too. The same reasons it's a fun read make it endlessly adaptable into film. It's got everything: an epic, mythical central conflict, a mad scientist, horror, adventure, chase scenes. It's been made into plays since 1823 and movies since 1910. When Hollywood gets tired of making movies about Frankenstein, it is tired of making movies. Entro Maestro Guillermo del Toro, arguably the king of noble monsters. I've been a fan of his work since Kronos in 1992. I liked Pan's Labyrinth and the Hellboy movies and The Shape of Water. It felt somewhat inevitable that he should write and direct a Frankenstein movie. Monsters are his jam. Del Toro's film moves the story to the 1850s. It begins again with the icebound ship picking up Frankenstein. On the ship, he tells his tale. Here, Frankenstein's father was a wealthy nobleman and a famous doctor who tutored the young Frankenstein in anatomy. At the death of his mother, Victor swears to learn the secrets of life. We next see him trying to convince a room full of students that he can animate dead flesh. The display catches the interest of a backer who wishes to fund Victor's research. Victor sets up in an abandoned tower, and his brother William helps him procure the parts he needs. Elizabeth here is William's fiancée, whom Victor is also interested in. Victor builds the creature and brings him to life with a lightning bolt, but here Victor doesn't immediately run. He stays with the creature for a few weeks, trying to teach it. Elizabeth meets the creature, who is chained up in the lower level, and the two share a moment. The monster here is very tall and rather beautiful. There's nothing gruesome about this fellow, apart from the bluish skin, and the seams where his parts go together. But otherwise he is very pretty. Eventually Victor gives up and declares it a failed experiment, since the monster can only say his name and otherwise seems stupid. Victor torches the tower with the monster still in it and leaves, but the monster escapes down a storm drain. The movie then does a very clever thing and has the monster climb aboard the ship and tell his part of the story himself. He relates his escape into the woods, where he's shot at, and picks up clothes from a dead soldier. He makes his way to the back of a cottage, where he learns to speak and read watching a family with a blind father who teaches a young girl. Here, a pack of wolves attacks the farm, and most of the family leaves, but the old blind man insists on staying for the winter. The creature introduces himself to the old man, and the two become friends, until the hunters come back and shoot the creature, thinking he's a monster. When he comes round, he finds the wolves have come back and attack the old man. The monster attacks the wolves, but it's too late and the old man dies. The monster had gone back to the ruins of the tower and there found papers left by Frankenstein, and learned what he is and how he was made. Armed with an address, the creature decides to go find his maker. He makes his way to Geneva, where William and Elizabeth are preparing for their wedding. Here, the creature confronts Victor and asks for his own mate, one who is undying, like he is. Victor flat out refuses, and the monster attacks him. The guests, hearing the noise, go up to see what's wrong, and William gets hurled to a wall and dies. Elizabeth gets between Victor and the monster and takes a bullet meant for the creature. The monster carries her out to a cave where she dies. Victor vows vengeance and chases the creature to the ends of the earth, getting us back to the ship in the ice. Victor dies, apologizing to the monster with his last breath. So it is kind of like the book. Del Toro's movie condenses a lot of plot at the end there, having everyone die all at once, and the monster only tangentially responsible. He's not a cold-hearted killer, instead he's a romantic monster. He's far more appealing than the crazed Victor and the boring William. I went into this movie convinced that a movie of Frankenstein was pretty much always going to be less than its book. Del Toro's movie showed me something I wasn't quite expecting. It showed me that a movie adaptation is always going to be different from its book. This might sound obvious, but for me this was a humbling exercise. I watch movies and presume to judge them against their source material, but a movie is and always will be a distinct work of art. To compare them is to compare apples and oranges and ask which is better. Del Toro's movie gave me an object lesson in the task of adaptation. The movie both is and is not true to the book. I admire Del Toro's adaptation immensely. He keeps the book in mind everywhere, but then changes it. It's like watching a dance. He knows the steps, but then improvises on them. Guillermo del Toro's screenplay is amazing. There are lines in it of startling beauty, lines I liked as much as the original, which means this movie is doing something kinda neat. It's adding to the legend. We don't think about this much, but a good adaptation can add to an old story. Think of the line, "It's alive." That's not from the book, it's from the movie. Watching this movie, I realized that Frankenstein is perhaps unfilmable as written. Considering how many times it's been filmed, this might seem contradictory, but as far as I know, none of the adaptations stick to the book. Some get closer, but they all have narrative breaks. The problem comes down largely to the fact that Frankenstein spends most of his part of the story alone. The second he creates life in the book, he abandons it and runs off. It's fabulous for a book, but terrible for a movie. The same thing goes for the creature. He spends most of his time watching from the sidelines. These people both have to interact or there's not much to watch. So the movie adds people for these characters to talk to. Del Toro's does it with the financier and Elizabeth, and then with the blind man. About the monster, it feels a little strange having the creature be this attractive. Jacob Elordi is gorgeous as the monster. Romantic monsters are very much a Del Toro thing, but it felt strange finding the creature so beautiful after spending so much time in the book reading that he looks like a mummy. Finding him hot made me feel weirdly guilty, like I was attracted to my cousin. It makes his monster's request for a mate feel a bit unnecessary too, since in every other respect he's the perfect man. Tall, gorgeous, well-read, immortal. They use immortality here as the reason he needs a mate, because otherwise he's perfectly capable of winning human ladies. He won Elizabeth over in no time flat. I love his creature design, though, with the elegant lines tracing along the pieces where they've been put together. It made the creature look well constructed, rather than being a patchwork. Jacob Elordi does some fabulous work here, using his super long limbs to give the creature a slightly animal feel, where he crouches and crawls at first. His creature is absolutely magnetic. You simply can't help but watch him. It's a treasure of a performance. I had no idea Elordi was this talented. The last time I saw him, it was as the hunky hunk in the Kissing Booth movies. But he's fabulous here. Oscar Isaac gives a good go at Frankenstein, but he seems hedged in by the part. Frankenstein here is a self-centered scientist, but he really isn't given much character past that. He's not the mad genius working alone, he's just a bit of a jerk who hits on his brother's fiancée. It's too bad because Isaac would have been fun to watch unleashed into a full manic genius. But this movie is a great version of Frankenstein. It is, like most of Guillermo del Toro's movies, strange and wonderful. I think the screenplay is sublime. There are lines in there that are better than the original. It's a haunting movie, beautiful and dark, and Jacob Elordi's creature is great. So for book versus movie, yes, the book still wins. Mary Shelley created a foundation myth in Frankenstein, a story that transcends time and will last long into the future. Stories like that are incredibly rare. Side notes. I had some time to dig into Frankenstein, so I took the opportunity to read the 1818 version alongside the main one. I found it a bit dry, to be honest. The later one has better writing, descriptions are better, the creature is far more dramatic. Shelley changed the writing style so the later version has more passive tense rather than the active tense in the first one. So where the first one had, "I did this thing," the latter one has, "this happened to me." At first I thought this was just a style thing to make the book read better, but after thinking about it for a few days, wondering why Shelley would use passive tense with her main character, I suddenly realized what she was doing and it blew my mind. See, the entire story of Frankenstein is told to us by Frankenstein. But he is not a neutral party here. He is guilty too. so he shapes the story to make himself look less guilty. Victor is manipulating the story, making him the classic unreliable narrator. Once you realize this, the whole book reads differently. We're getting the story of Frankenstein from the charismatic madman at its center. Frankenstein is very smart, but he's also insane, so he tells the story to make himself look good. When Shelley adds language about fate and destiny in the 1831 edit, it doesn't just sound better, it enhances his character. It's Victor avoiding blame. No one can blame you if you were driven by destiny. This makes Victor into a narcissist. He spends a lot of time bemoaning his fate, but skips over any place where he might have acted to change things. Notably, he falls into a delirium and a fever every time he could otherwise be called on to do something. I think we're always somewhat aware that Frankenstein is not completely good, even if we're not sure why. In adaptation, the monster is almost inevitably the hero to Frankenstein's mad scientist. Even if we're not actively aware of why Frankenstein isn't completely trustworthy, we don't trust him. What is Victor's greatest sin? He abandons his creature at the moment of creation. For all that Victor bemoans his fate, he never takes responsibility for this huge lapse. Frankenstein is just a deadbeat dad. The whole creation scene is framed sexually. There is obsession, followed by a frantic lead-up, to a moment of intense ecstasy, and then immediate revulsion and withdrawal. This is a description of a man's approach to conception. It's all very exciting at first, but the moment it involves responsibility, it's uninteresting. Victor leaves and is glad when the monster is gone when he gets back. So, of course, Victor reframes his failure as a guardian into a heroic quest to destroy his creation. His dramatic descriptions are an attempt to distract from his monumental stupidity and carelessness. Frankenstein is really not the hero here. He's the failure who created all his own problems. But he's also a narcissist, so he'll never admit it, instead using the language of fate and destiny. Rereading Frankenstein as an adult was awesome. I could suddenly see all the literary stuff that's packed in there. The book has an onion's layers of meaning. There's feminism and social responsibility and crime and education. You can keep going deeper and deeper into this book for more and more interesting takes. But ultimately, it always just comes back to the same awesome story. Man creates monster, man refuses monster, monster comes after man. Beautiful, tragic, endlessly adaptable. Frankenstein is truly a story for the ages. But that's it for me today. Thanks for listening. This is Rose with Rose Colored Movies.